we're going to talk about one other sort of the other side of the coin from Adam Unikowski's Substack this week. He wrote about this DC Circuit case, which is Marin Audubon Society versus the FAA. And he wrote a pretty interesting piece about environmental impact statements and how generative AI might be useful on the agency side of rulemaking. And so, you want to summarize a little bit about Adam's piece and the takeaways?
Sure, I'll do my best to try to summarize what was a really great piece about an act that I wasn't familiar with, the National Environmental Policy Act, which, as I gather from Adam's piece, is an act that requires that agencies prepare environmental impact statements, or EISs, in advance of any sort of federal development project. And the goal of the EIS is not necessarily, as it's structured under this act, for these agencies to create a record that judges would review for substance to determine whether the project should actually happen at all. The goal really is to educate the public so that the public can engage with the agencies and do what we were talking about in the last segment, which is try to work with the agencies to shape what the public thinks should happen around these projects. So it's an entirely procedural versus a substantive framework, but judges end up getting involved in the litigation that follows. Sometimes the creation of these EIS reports, when plaintiffs who are unhappy with a proposed federal project sue. And Adam's point really is that even though the lawsuits are about ostensibly the EIS statements themselves, the real desired outcome on the part of the plaintiffs is to slow down or stop the project altogether, right? And the creation of these EISs can take years, which can stifle development of projects that maybe we want to happen. And the actual EISs themselves are done. He lays out the one in the DC Circuit case and pulls a few samples. They're done by experts. They're very thorough. In that case, I think it was 3,600 pages of detailed information about the impact of this proposed project. And Adam talks about how AI could enable us to accelerate two pieces of this work. And he has some interesting ideas about how we could reshape the way that the NEPA framework currently operates and the friction it creates by having the AI actually assist in producing the EIS in the first place, so it doesn't take years and years to produce. Also, he sort of has three different pieces of this, I think. That piece, producing the EIS, making the EIS dynamic so that even the most interested person in the public is not going to be able to read 3,600 pages about a project. But if we use a chat GPT-like interface, we can upload the EIS and ask questions of it so that we can focus on learning what is really important to us as a member of the public. So having a more dynamic interface involved. And then I think his boldest suggestion, and you can correct me, Bridget, if I'm misstating any part of his argument and discussion here, is removing the judicial review piece of this altogether, because the judges are not reviewing these EISs for their content to determine whether the content was properly designed. They're really reviewing the procedure through which the EISs were produced and whether it's sufficient. And Adam argues that in that case, in that specific use case, AI could do that work without engaging judges. But I'm going to stop because it was a really complex piece, and I want to see what I've misstated about Adam.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, I encourage everybody to just read Adam's piece because he's such a great writer. And you were saying this earlier, Jen. He writes about complicated legal concepts in a way that's really clear and simple, and you don't have to be an expert either in rulemaking or the substantive case to understand what the arguments he's making. So I really encourage you to read it. But yeah, I think you got it. I mean, I didn't know anything about this process myself either. I've never been an environmental litigator, but apparently the time to complete an environmental impact statement can be 4.5 years. excuse me, or many taking over 6 years, and no project can proceed until it's complete. And so, you could imagine having a position where six year delay is actually what you want. But the truth is that there's pretty good evidence that clean energy products actually have a harder time making it through this process than oil and gas because they have exemptions. So it isn't clear that the point of the process is actually serving the interest it was intended to serve. But Adam says there's really good reasons to do it if we can figure out how not to weaponize it, right? So this technology might really be the way to figure out how not to weaponize it. If the technology can produce a very thorough environmental impact statement in a short timeline, and then produce it in a way that people who really do know something about the particular project, the particular area, the effects it would have on, in this case, the mating places for what's the plural of grouse? Grouses?
Oh,
Grousei? Grousey? I don't know.
I don't know. Grouses
Grouse.
sound good.
The grouse. But, the people who actually have information about that, if they could interact with it and really get that information to the agency, and then the agency could take it into account and make a change that um, kind of was win-win for everybody, that feels like a pretty good outcome. And isn't that why we have the rulemaking process? It's so that we can get important information to an agency so that the experts in this area can make a better decision about what to do with it. If the process has just become one that just is a way to delay and nobody actually can read 3,600 pages and interact with it in a way to make the process better, then what are we doing, right? And so the fact that the technology could actually help serve the purpose of the process, or at least its intended purpose, feels kind of exciting. I know that the part that people I think will be the most worried about is having the technology actually do the procedural review. But again, because it's not substantive, it's not like you need the technology to say, yes, in fact, this is going to have bad outcomes on the grouses,
I'm gonna say
grousey,
Grace. I'm gonna go with Grace.
grace. Yeah, on the grace. Um, yeah, I mean, you know, if that were the question, then I think you need humans, and not that judges are experts in Grace, or Grace's mating habits, but they can review the work of the experts and make sure, make sure that there isn't a legal problem with the project proceeding. But if it's really just if the only question is, has the agency done procedurally what it's required to do, so that the public can interact and and move on to the substantive part of the process. Um, the AI can probably do that as well as any human, and maybe even better. Like that's the kind of project that you could build, I think, today with this technology at home. With like a custom GPT. Like it's because again, it's like a niche data set, right? You could teach it. These are the elements that an EIS has to have. You could train it on, perfected EISs. I don't know if that's my plurals are really a hot mess today. I apologize for all my plurals. Um, but you could imagine like building a tool that could do that very, very effectively, and again, save judges time for the kind of work that um, judges really need to do, right? That we're not going to want to defer to technology. And I'm not saying you wouldn't, maybe I think there are like steps along the way in this process. You could imagine building a generative AI tool that could take the first cut, right? And say, we've reviewed it against our EIS GPT, and we see, these three problems, and then the agency could fix those three problems, right? It could just help the agency like do what it needs to do. We think it's met all of the things on the checklist, and then you could imagine going to a judge to either confirm or send it back for additional procedural work. It just feels to me like it's the kind of thing that could do some of the work that probably isn't the best use of our judges' time, and to save the judges for the stuff that we really need humans doing, where judgment is really important. So I think it's a very cool idea. And I am really interested in the possibilities for governments and courts. As you know, we've talked about this a million times. You too, I know, how they can, get the most of this technology. And I worry a little bit, always do, that they could get left behind if the resources aren't there to help them figure out how to use it to protect the public, which is what they do. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think back to, I think last year Ezra Klein wrote a piece for the Times about infrastructure and how long it takes in the US to build any federal project. And I think he makes the argument that lawyers really are the problem, that we put up so many different governance structures that they all overlap, and the result is some of the things that Adam's talking about. And to me, I was excited when you shared this with me because I don't think you wanna be less deliberative. I think there are really good reasons to have structures in place, but I would hope that lawyers would start thinking about at the outset of the creation of an administrative framework, how might we leverage AI in a way that actually enables, to your point, enables what we're trying to achieve here and doesn't end up creating this complexity that people can use either intentionally or unintentionally to delay things forever. And then we could
yeah.
elevate sort of the esteem of the profession in terms of accelerating development and contributing to the production of new projects.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's a lot of exciting upside potential. Again, startup founders out there, government, LLM tech, excited about it.
So, based on that one example from the NEPA example, um, how can we think about a framework that can guide us to find other places in the law or the administrative um, agency realm where we could think about these solutions? What do you think are the hallmarks?
Yeah, I think this is one of the and Adam does a nice job thinking about this, but I feel like there's so much more thinking we can do around this. The reason why this might be an easy, use case if you're building a continuum is there's no due process rights at stake, right? There's no, individual liberty, that's called into question in a simply just a procedural step of a regulatory process. Um, I'm always thinking about this in all the different kinds of disputes that we have, and where along the way could you build in, um, I'm thinking of them as like modules, or, my talented CTO, Diana, always calls them lily pads. Like, what are the lily pads along the way where you can have the technology assist the human decision maker, to save the human decision maker for the important stuff that only the human can do. So you could imagine, steps along the way of any process where some of it is just procedural, right? Like if you need to understand a timeline of a particular dispute or a timeline of a regulatory process so that people can engage with it and agree or disagree. Having a human judge or her clerk put that together isn't the best use of, talented lawyers' time. And you could imagine having a lily pad where the technology did that and said to the parties, like, "Do you agree with this?" I'm thinking now in the like ADR process. I think for courts to have that much interaction in the middle of the case is harder, given their limits. But you could imagine sending the parties the tech um, produced timeline of events and saying this is the timeline that seems to reflect this project or this dispute. Tell me what's wrong with it, right? And then the human could review that incoming from parties and edit it and update it and get to a place where everybody agreed. I think the possibility that we can take parts of a dispute resolution process and get agreement along the way will really help us with better dispute resolution at the end, right? If we all agree, along the way that these are yep, this is the timeline, these are the different legal arguments we're making, these are the responses. We all agree about the universe of things in this dispute. then we're all going to come out of that process with, I think, I think we're all going to come out feeling like we were heard, we were understood, even if we didn't prevail.
Mhm.
All the literature on procedural fairness, I think, is really important right now. You can build in so much more procedural fairness when you use these tools along the way. Another reason why I'm excited about some of those lily pads along the way. I don't know. Do you have other thoughts on that
I
topic?
I
Ways we
don't
can
think
think
I
about the
can
framework?
I don't think I can add anything to what you just described. I mean, I share your excitement. I always am looking for ways that the profession can really elevate the problem solving for the parties. If you're in a
What?
dispute context or if you're in a regulatory context, like helping the public actually engage with agencies in a way that shape policy for the public and finding these cool opportunities to leverage technology to elevate the people that matter in all of this is exciting to me. And you just offered the perfect segue to a future episode that we're going to have around disputes themselves and how we can be leveraging Gen AI and how a few really cool startups are doing that on the plaintiff side, the defense side. And then we can also talk about how it unfolds in ADR. There are just really, really interesting and exciting opportunities on the horizon. So I loved this conversation. It did show both sides of the coin, right? Technology can be used for ill or for good. And we're excited to have conversations about how to use it for good.
Definitely. This was fun.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this episode of 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. We will see you on a future episode. And until then, be well. Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.